These are notes on proteins. Proteins are one of the macromolecules found in living organisms alongside nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and lipids. But for this semester, we need a more detailed understanding of proteins, and so that's why we're going to do these notes right now. Proteins are the most varied of all the carbon-based molecules. So when you're comparing proteins to lipids and carbohydrates, there are way more different types of proteins than there are carbohydrates, for example, in living organisms. We're really familiar with structural proteins, like those that make up our muscles. Those of you who eat meat, the reason meat is so high in protein is because you're eating the muscle of another animal. And so those proteins, for example, are called like actin and myosin. They have names. All the proteins, different protein molecules have different names. But then there's also all sorts of other structural proteins that make structures in your body. So for example, there are melanin receptors, which are a protein that allows your body to make melanin, which gives your skin and hair and eyes actually as well, the color that they have. So when you're thinking of structural proteins, it's not just muscles. There's all sorts of structural proteins in your body. The keratin that makes your fingernails, that's a protein. There's also functional proteins. So functional proteins, as they say, have some sort of function for doing a process in your body. So hemoglobin is a protein that is rich in iron, and it transports oxygen around your body. So when my daughter became vegetarian, her doctor asked her, do you know what iron does? And I said to her, iron transports oxygen around your body. That's through this protein called hemoglobin. So that's a protein that has a function in your body. Some people get confused because they're like, well, it's also a structure, it's hemoglobin. That's true, but the purpose of hemoglobin is not to make a part of your body, it's to carry out a function in your body. And so that's the difference there, right? Every molecule is technically a structure in your body, but it's not, its purpose is not necessarily to be part of the body structure. If you're confused, I can talk more about that in class. And then you have transport proteins. Transport proteins, for example, are channels that move things in and out of cells. So we're gonna learn a little bit more about transport proteins later this year, but if you have something outside your cell and you need it to get inside your cell or vice versa, a lot of times it will go through a protein channel. So think of it like a tunnel that links the inside and the outside of the cell, but that's made of proteins. So again, obviously that's a structure, but its purpose is to transport things into and out of cells. Then you have what are called enzymes. Enzymes are a classification of protein that speed up reactions. So lactase is an enzyme. What lactase does is it breaks down the sugar lactose. So lactose is a carbohydrate. If you want to digest it, you need the enzyme lactase to help break that lactose up into its two monomers. So lactose is the polymer. It's a disaccharide, meaning it's just two little sugar monomers. One is glucose, one is called galactose. So what the lactase does is it breaks that up into the glucose and the galactose. And then finally, and I put this in parentheses, proteins can be broken down by cells for energy. So proteins have like 4 milligrams or 4 calories per milligram of energy. But it's in parentheses because really your body doesn't use proteins for energies. If your body is using proteins for energies, something's really gone wrong. So for example, somebody who maybe has an eating disorder and so doesn't have enough carbohydrates and lipids for energy, those are the two main things that we use for energy, carbohydrates and lipids. Then the body will start to digest like your muscle. Another example, like if you're starving and perhaps you're in an environment where for whatever reason you don't have adequate access to food, then your body may start to use your proteins for energy. But it's not the body's first recourse at all. And in fact, the protein industry has done a wonderful job convincing you that proteins equate with energy, right? Think about if you are tired or you have a sports practice to go to, you're like, let me grab a protein bar because that will give me energy at practice. It actually doesn't. You want to stick to carbohydrates for short-term protein, like fruits and vegetables are going to be your fastest source of energy. And then some fat for long-term energy, like plant fats are really good for that, like nuts and seeds and avocados. But proteins really are not good for energy. Your body doesn't use them. And in fact, if you have too much protein, they're such long molecules that your body's going to put energy into digesting them instead of you getting energy to work out. So it can actually be a little counterintuitive and you can end up with less energy to work out. It drives me crazy when I see people like at soccer tournaments eating a hamburger before they have a game. That's going to take so much energy to digest. You're not going to be able to play at your peak. So proteins, like other carbon-based molecules in animals and plants and fungi and living organisms, are polymers. The protein monomer is called an amino acid. So there are 20 amino acids that build proteins. I'm going to show you those on the next slide. Humans make 12 of them. And so the rest we have to get from our food. Now, when I say make 12 of them, what I mean really is rearrange other atoms that we've eaten into the ones we need. But humans can only synthesize 12 of those in our cells. So regardless of whether we make them or not, the original materials come from what we're eating, but then the other 8 of them we have to eat, like in those forms. We can't rearrange them from something else. And so those are usually referred to in nutrition as the essential amino acids. Every amino acid is a carbon bonded to 4 other parts that loosely has this structure. So here's the, let me get my pen here. Here's the central carbon here. And then there's a nitrogenous group here. Every amino acid is going to have this version here. I don't know why it keeps, it's got to be my trackpad. There's a hydrogen here. There's a, we call this a COOH group right here. I believe it's also referred to as a carboxyl group, but I could be wrong in that. I haven't looked up my organic chemistry in a while. And then this is the hardest one. This is what's called an R group. Now, if you look on a periodic table, there is no element that's just R. This is not an element. This stands for a group of other elements put together. And it's that R group that differs between amino acids that makes each amino acid unique. So for example, these are all the amino acids and they're subdivided into whether they're polar or not polar or have a positive charge versus a negative charge. And so you can see, right, every amino acid has this same structure here. Again, I don't know what's going on, but then this highlighted portion, that's the R group. And that's what makes it, right? These two are identical with the exception of the R group. These are actually, these are identical, right? With the exception of the R group. And so those are all the amino acids. You don't need to write these down. I'm not going to quiz you on specific amino acids. You are going to get used to them. We're going to talk about them more in this semester, but don't spend your time writing these down. Some of them you've maybe heard of. Phenylalanine. Some people have actually an allergy to phenylalanine, or it's called like PKU. It's a genetic thing. Some of you maybe have heard of tryptophan. Tryptophan is the compound in turkey that makes you tired. I mean, I've heard of all of these, so I'm looking at them and I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that does. But I would say those might be the 2 that you've heard of. So those are the amino acids. So right, these are all monomers. So then the way they polymerize, that's the verb of form of polymer, is the amino acids are linked by peptide bonds, which are covalent bonds. We just call them peptide bonds when they are linking protein, or when they're linking amino acids together. It's like a fancier word in a protein for this covalent bond. All of these bonds, in fact, are covalent, but the ones linking one amino acid to another, those are the ones we call peptide bonds. So like, here's one amino acid here, here's one amino acid here, and then that's linked together by a peptide bond. And so that's how the protein would polymerize. But then how proteins differ, right, is in the number and order of the amino acids. And so just like there's 26 letters of the alphabet and we can make all the words, right, simply by varying the number and order of the letters, proteins are the same way, except that most proteins have like thousands to tens of thousands of amino acids. I can't think of any protein, right? Like I was explaining lactose earlier in these notes, which is simply two sugar monomers. It's called a disaccharide. There's just two monomers. You digest it into the galactose and the glucose, but lactose is this very small polymer. I can't think of any proteins that are like 2 amino acids long. I don't even know, I mean, we could Google it. If there's some that are like 100 amino acids long, proteins are gigantic molecules, which is why they take so long to digest. Going back to what I was saying before about eating protein before you work out. So the amino acids, though, interact with each other to give the protein a specific structure. And then that structure is linked to its function. We'll go into that in more detail, I think in 2 units. So this, for example, is hemoglobin. So you're used to elements bonding together. So actually, let me go back quickly, right? You're used to this kind of structure where one element is bonded to another element. This, by the way, is a double bond here. I don't know, I know that during COVID, some of you may not have gotten into that much detail, right? But you're used to elements bonding to each other to form one large molecule. However, in a protein, that has happened, but because it's so long and bulky, elements actually bond or attract, let's say attract. It's called a hydrogen bond. It's a horrible name because it's not a true bond, it's an attraction. But elements actually attract to other parts of this same long protein molecule to give it a structure. And so it's almost like if you have a long piece of tape, sometimes when you're carrying that tape from one place to another, like it'll stick to itself, right, in different parts and then be annoying. That's like that's like a protein. The amino acids, the elements in the amino acids are attracting to each other in different amino acids in different parts of the protein to give it like a folded structure. So that's sort of your intro into proteins. Please let us know in class if you have any questions about them. Have a good day.